Okay, well, hello to everybody who has joined us today. Thank you so much. Today, I am speaking with some wonderful colleagues. First off, I have Zara Habib here with me, who works in my office. Say hi, Zara.
Hello.
Yay! I also have Dan Brown, who is the chair of the Faculty Association at the University of Waterloo. Say hello.
Hello. Hi. How are you? It's good to see
I'm
you.
so good. It's nice to see you as well. And I also have the incoming president of the Faculty Association at Wilfrid Laurier University, Rob Kristofferson. Say hello, Rob.
Hey, how are you?
I'm very well. I'm very well. So I have brought everybody together today to have a very quick conversation about two big things. So the first is for us to have an opportunity to speak about what is happening at Laurentian, what's happening in our post-secondary sector more broadly, but using Laurentian as our starting point. But the reason I asked for us to have this conversation was because over the course of the last few weeks, as the critic for colleges and universities, I have been contacted by a number of people who are mortified by the government's decision to not invest and protect and save Laurentian. A broader discussion about whether or not the minister, so Minister Ross Romano, is fit to be in charge of and responsible for this ministry if decisions are going to be made, especially during a pandemic, to not invest in the jobs and the sort of the ripple effect of what will happen when you don't invest in the sector, but also at Laurentian in particular. So we're very, very concerned about the folks in Sudbury. And then we have this particular weekend, which, as far as I'm concerned, is best described with my doctorly hat as a hot mess, where we saw the government make some decisions about what we need to get us through the third wave of this pandemic that didn't align with what we were hearing from the scientists, the science table, the experts, etc. Then sort of roll back some of those decisions and then add some other decisions. And people are very frustrated at the moment. And so, what I wanted to do was to provide us with a space to be able to engage in a public discussion about this. Because the other piece that I'm also hearing, and I promise I'm going to throw it over to you in a moment, the other piece that I'm also hearing is that people are frustrated that these discussions are not happening in public, that a lot of these decisions that are being made are happening behind closed doors where people can't engage and you don't feel like you're part of the conversation. And yet this is the government that you have elected. This is supposed to be your government. So with that being the case, I'm going to start with just a very general question. What are you folks hearing on the ground in Waterloo region about the response to Laurentian? Why don't we start with you, Dan?
Sure. Thank you, Laura May. I would say that the thing that we're hearing more than anything is horror. Uh, this was a proud university that clearly was having trouble, has been having trouble for many years, hasn't had successfully been balancing its books for a long time, but there was no evidence that it was in anywhere near this kind of a crisis until February 1st when they went into receivership or insolvency, I guess is the correct word. Um, and that was more or less out of left field. And the normal response to those kinds of crises in the last long while has been a certain degree of belt tightening combined with backstopping, combined with making the runway long enough that the public institution can respond to the crisis that's facing it. So there was an article by Alex Usher, who's a well-known writer on higher education last week, that suggested that a $35 million loan, which isn't small but isn't gigantic, would have been sufficient to really build the runway out so that Laurentian could have gotten its house in order. And instead, we saw last week something on the order of 100 professors lose their job, and we actually have no idea how many staff lost their job. It hasn't been reported. We saw a university that's clearly not in a position to recover smoothly from this crisis. And so what it's going to look like in 2 years, I couldn't tell you. In 5 years, I couldn't tell you. And then, as you said, as you alluded earlier, I mean, the situation in Sudbury is really grave. This is a This is a valued community resource, and it's also, I mean, it's the local university. Cities in the north are far from each other, and telling a student who's been planning their finances around university that the university they should go to is the one in their hometown, that's a reasonable thing to do. And Sudbury had that, and now in a very large number of fields it doesn't, and that's going to make higher education less accessible to a lot of folks. That's really challenging. So those are a bunch of the things that I'm hearing, but also just shock and horror at this being the outcome of a collection of, as you described, closed door decisions that where the ministry hasn't been giving any information about what it actually has as its preferences. It's been really bad.
Yeah, and Rob, before I throw it over to you, because I do want to ask you the same question about sort of just generally what you're hearing on the ground, but I want to kind of add a little piece to that, because I keep being told about the ripple effect. I keep being told that there are particular programs that we're losing, the Indigenous Studies program and the midwifery program, and the impact that that has in the broader community, which makes me sometimes wonder if the minister is aware that our university campuses are in community and they help to build these communities, right? So just wondering if you're hearing anything along those lines from folks out this way in Waterloo region as well.
Yeah, I mean, just following up on what Dan said, I think you articulated things very well, Dan. Shock and horror are the common reactions to this. Something like the midwifery program, my understanding is that the university had a pretty well net zero contribution to that program to keep it going, yet they axed it anyways. And it's such an important program. So these things don't make sense, right? It was done very fast. And I wonder if the government, I can't see how the Ministry of Colleges and Universities was not aware of this situation. And so I can't help but wonder if they are using this as a test case, as a way to handle universities generally, to sort of restructure and thin them out, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
It's that at universities we have really well-developed systems in order to handle things like financial problems and the need to change up programs and things like that. And what's happened here is that's all just been cast aside. And instead, a corporate law, the CCAA, has been used to just like in a very ham-fisted way, reorganize a university without any real thought. It's all just about dollars and cents rather than about what is good for the community. What is a university? What makes that sort of universe of education that we call a university, what it is, and how do we package that together? So in addition to that, I think one of the big reactions that I'm seeing is the idea that collective agreements are just cast aside in the process. So we have, in most collective agreements at universities across Canada, very clear processes to go through what's called financial exigency, and to talk about, the need to change up programs and things like that, reassign faculty, even potentially do layoffs and things like that. That's a really well-considered process that also incorporates, thinking about the academics of the institution. My understanding is that the Laurentian Faculty Association has been pushing for a very long time to get an understanding of the financial situation at their university. Like, faculty associations are part of that community. We want to work. And part of collective bargaining is to have access to the full financial information of the institution that you're bargaining with, so that you can make the best informed decisions that you possibly can. My understanding is Laurentian just held off on giving that, to the point where they were going to file for a bad faith bargaining measure right before, like the day before.
Right before this, right?
It was
That's right.
So, faculty tried But the financial problems, which I gather stemmed from sort of an over-exuberant building program, rather than the cost of faculty, which have actually been on a decline at Laurentian in recent years, was really at the root of this.
So you raised two really interesting things that I think we need to pay attention to. So one, what I have also been hearing, and Zara, you can jump in anytime. We've also been hearing in our office that there were some long-standing issues with trying to be clear on what was happening financially at the institution. But I'm also hearing to like a balancing out of that part of what the broader sector has raised with me as the critic is that the lack of investment in the sector over decades has made a lot of institutions have to come up with new and innovative ways to, meet their own bottom lines, to get their operating budget up to par. They've had to make some pretty difficult decisions when it comes to what they can offer and what they can't offer. So for those that might be tuning in that aren't from the sector, you might have a lot of courses advertised on the books, but you can't necessarily teach those courses because you don't have faculty with that expertise anymore, because when people have retired or have moved on to other institutions, you've not been able to rehire because you don't have enough money to be able to do that, which is how we lose some pretty brilliant programs. Like we've seen that with women and gender studies, for instance, in various institutions across the province. And so the reason I'm raising that is because there was this opportunity in the midst of a pandemic when the minister said, look, I'm going to help some of these institutions out. And COU had asked that every institution be helped out because we're all impacted by the pandemic. The minister decided, now we're just going to help out some institutions. And I saw a rise of horror when Laurentian was left off of that list.
That's right. It was.
Right?
That's right. It was.
At the same time that I understand that there is ample blame to lay at the feet of, let's say, the Board of Governors and such at Laurentian, there is a lot that the minister could have done. And I'm wondering how you folks feel about this bigger call that's now been coming to actually have him removed and replaced with somebody who understands the sector. Is that something that you, like, what are your thoughts about that? Because I think it's a bit complicated. Do you have faith that there's somebody else that could take his place to be able to do the work that you need in the sector? What is it that you want to see from a minister for post-secondary? I know it's a big question, but it's what I've been grappling with since the calls have been made. Like, who on that side of in the government would be able to commit to investing in the sector, and what is it that we want from them?
So Laura May, I think what we're seeing here is a huge contradiction in our government. You're right, over the last couple of decades, investment in post-secondary has been on a decline in Ontario. We have the lowest per capita student funding in the province, or in the country. And it's, often presented in terms of the need for, tightening our belts because we don't want to overspend and things like that. As a society, I think one of the things that the pandemic has shown is that governments can spend and the sky doesn't fall.
It's true.
Actually, it generates demand in the economy and gets things going again and keeps things going. So those investments are really valuable and good. And I find it, very strange that the government has implemented this thing where they're calling it performance funding, where per student they're going to be giving money to universities based on things like job market outcomes, which are not really tied to academics, and they're generally tied to only those programs that are, have the names of jobs are going to lead to, right? And I mean, for a government that says it's about jobs in the economy, I think one of the ultimate ironies is they don't look at the evidence that's out there to make their decisions, right? So it's clear that, with Laurentian being an example, humanities programs, social sciences programs are particularly targeted. And
Yep.
I've heard conservative politicians many times talk about how, you know, those programs are full of cultural Marxists and things like that, and they don't lead to the type of employment we need in today's economy. That's just provably false.
Yeah.
The World Bank of Canada did a big study in 2018 across Canada. It's called Humans Wanted: How Canadian Youth Can Thrive in the Age of Disruption. And they looked at the 2.4 million jobs that were scheduled to be created in Canada between 2018 and 2021. They
Mm-hmm.
looked at 20,000 skills rankings that would be required of those jobs across 300 different occupational types. And they did that partly by surveying a whole bunch of employers that employed over 1 million Canadian workers. And what they found the projected skills were that we need from our universities is what they called foundational skills. Things like right at the very top of the list were things like active listening,
Yep.
speaking, critical thinking, social perceptiveness, complex problem solving, and things like that. So those are the kinds of skills that are delivered from the types of programs that are most under attack. And so I think it's really ideological when it boils down to it. If
Yeah.
this is a government that is really true to the idea that we need to, more than ever before in Canada's history and Ontario's history, invest in the higher education of our youth, there is a clear roadmap of the type of education we need to invest in. And it's their ideology that seems to be getting in the way of them investing in it. Instead, they're pulling money back.
It's interesting that you say that too. I used to work at, as many academics, I've had many jobs. And so I worked at Ryerson in the Diversity Institute. And we also had done a ton of research about the kinds of skills that we need our workforce to have in a new kind of workforce, right? Like we're doing more things online. You've got to be a little bit more flexible, which means that there's some soft skills that you don't necessarily get outside of the liberal arts education that we can offer at these universities. Those are the things that are going to make you better equipped for any job. Like it actually, those are the skills that are going to let you pivot in something like, I don't know, a pandemic, when you've got to, do something new. Go ahead, Dan.
Yeah, I mean, it's even. Rob is a labor historian. I'm a computer scientist, so in some sense, I come from the charmed circle as far as these kinds of funders consider. But and Waterloo Computer Science is world renowned. But we require our students to take courses in communications, to take courses outside of math and computing, because those are the things that train them for the. It's one thing to get the first job, but it's those soft skills that you're alluding to that get them the second and third jobs too, and that really, really matter. And also train them to be prepared for working in diverse work environments.
Yep.
And handle, as you say, the joys and complexities of a time like the last year. I think the other thing that's probably we haven't mentioned that goes towards what are they doing is there was a massive tuition cut and freeze that happened at the beginning of this government. Now, I think tuition for our students is a serious barrier to some of them being able to participate in higher education. So I don't. That's fine, but that's just money that ceased to be in the system.
Yep.
And so it's okay if you're going to create it through some other means, but to just take that away from the system entirely and say you have to make do with less tuition and frozen tuition and magically replace it somehow, that has placed some universities on a real financial pipeline to disaster. And we saw that in Sudbury.
Yep.
I mean, there's the corresponding transition has been to recruiting international students, which is exciting because a lot of those international students become Canadians. They immigrate. And I mean, as an immigrant myself, I support Canadians coming who were born elsewhere. And I think that's an important part of the landscape of this country that I have grown to love very much in the 20 years that I've lived here. But it's really risky.
Yeah.
And the risk hasn't paid off for Laurentian. And you worry about how that's that's scary. And it also scares me when I think about, I mean, I know a lot more about university finances than I know about college finances, but it's my understanding that the college sector is also very, very much playing this game of bringing in international students and surviving off of tuition for them. And I really hope that the next round of this is not that that a college that's not succeeding at that game winds up in the same kind of trouble that we saw Laurentian wind up in. It's a
Yeah.
tough thing.
It's really, really tough, and that's another big issue that keeps coming to our doorstep about the increase, like astronomical increase of tuition for international students, and the
Oh
fact that
yeah,
they're not getting anything for that additional money that they are paying to be at these institutions. And it goes back to, in my world, it goes back to the fact that there's so little investment in the sector that
that's right.
then you're not able to provide them with the particular supports that they need. They don't have access to a lot of the kinds of not the academic programming, but the stuff that needs to be the peripheral investment that you need to make in a new student, in a newcomer in your community, to ensure that they
Absolutely.
thrive when they get here. And so I've had a lot of people that have said, okay, that was just unfair, because now all it's done is it's put a whole other group of students, made university inaccessible for them and not provided them any return on investment.
Hmm.
It's also left us in this pickle where we don't have the supports that we need on the ground for any of the students. It doesn't matter where they're from. And this is all happening when there was like a transition. I feel like we were in, before I was elected, this transition to try and make higher education accessible to everyone. And there were a lot of things that people were advocating for to make sure that everybody could get there, because gone were the days where you could graduate from high school or not graduate from high school and still
Yep.
find a job somewhere.
That's
Now
right.
everybody's asking for a Bachelor of Arts. And where are you going to get that if everything is so expensive and you can't get there?
I found it kind of ironic that one of the sort of common things that was said about Laurentian is people would point to their financial problems and say, well, look, I can't remember what the numbers are, but a huge proportion of classes with fewer than 30 students in them. Of course it needs to be cut. You know, I went to Trent University to do my undergraduate. We had like 6 people in a class.
Yeah.
That is what real intensive university education is about, is that low ratio contact with professors. And I think that's what's led me to where I ended up in my life, is being able to have that experience. That's not an experience in Ontario's universities. Something like the 10% tuition reduction that the government made such a splash about, that was done, and it just disguised the fact that the Ontario government pulled something like $500 million off the table for Ontario universities.
That's right.
But I think one of the big silent issues that we don't hear about is contract faculty. At Laurentian, we've heard about the horrors of tenured faculty being fired, and that sends a chill as far as academic freedom goes, as far as the security of tenure goes, to universities across Canada, and that chill will affect our research climate nationally. But I think I've seen 1 or 2 news items that actually covers the fact that contract faculty, folks that teach courses, they don't have permanent full-time professor jobs, they teach course by course and they get paid course by course. They get paid maybe $7,000 or $8,000 a course and can teach 5 or 6 courses a year. These are folks with PhDs much of the time, who are excellent teachers and have really promising research agendas, but they're thrown into this precarious labor pool. And a university like my own has 50% of teaching done at our university are done by contract faculty members. And I'm not singling out my institution, because across the province, that's the case, right? And so that's
right.
one of sort of the silent aspects of progressive underfunding of universities.
So I'm going to ask us to leave this conversation here, because the master plan for those that are watching is that I'm going to keep bringing different people that represent different areas and places and spaces within the sector to keep this conversation going, because what I do think is really important is that we need to get very clear about what it is that we want to see in the post-secondary sector, what it is that we want. And from all of our conversation today, which has been fantastic, what I am hearing is that we want it to be accessible. We want it to be broader and rich, so that people can use their time in higher ed as an opportunity to do new things, to explore different avenues, so that that ripple effect is positive, versus what it is that we're seeing in Sudbury when you decide not to invest. And what we do know is that when you want something good to happen, when you want to create a sector that thrives, you've got to invest in it. You've got to believe in it, and you've got to invest in it. And if the person at the helm does not believe in it and doesn't want to invest in it, then we've got a really serious problem. And as Ontarians, it is our duty to put into the universe what it is that we want. And so thank you all so, so much for joining me today. This has been fantastic. Please stay safe, and everybody knows where to find me.
You too. Please stay safe.
Okay, bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.